You are listening to the Tales of Conundrum podcast, episode 19, Redline Ransom. Dawn paled the concrete while the Supra idled like a big cat purring in its sleep. Steady, warm, dangerous if woken wrong. Neal Bryson watched his breath ghost the windshield and sorted the world into numbers and edges. Tire temp, pad bite, camber gain over bumps. He pressed the clutch, light spring, clean take-up, then let it out again. The phone vibrated. Maya? Static, a clipped inhale, and then a man's voice, velvet over knives. Mr. Bryson. Win tonight's buy-in, and you'll hear her breathe. The line went dead. Neal stared at the road long enough for the idol to dip. He'd sworn off organized anything after the last time he mixed adrenaline with guilt. But the street was his church, if he picked the sermon. He thumbed the start button off, counting heartbeats, then on again. The B-58 barked and settled smoother than his pulse. Decision made. By sundown, the perimeter road became an artery of sodium light and upraised phones. Vale didn't show. Vale never showed. Marshals in masks did, along with a black Pelican case on a folding table like a judge's gavel. Buy in sprint, one said. 4 exits, no cops paid on this one. Top 2 to the drop. You want proof of life? You bring the checkered. He wrapped the case. Beacon unlocks her restraints when the final's done. Until then, you chase rules designed to make him choose badly later. Neal rolled to the line. 2 cars over, a blue RX-7 brapped. An A90 Supra automatic sat low on slicks. Crowd breath hung in the cool air, lenses hungry for a mistake to immortalize. He checked mirrors, traffic patterns, off-ramps, a delivery rider lane splitting behind the grid, random variables destined to become forces on the chassis. He cataloged the air's scent, a faint sweetness of spilled E85, the acrid promise of cooked pads. He ran his thumb over the leather shifter and pictured torque curves. The stock turbos swell from 2,000 to 5,500 RPM, then fall. He'd keep the motor in the fat part by short-shifting under load and using boost like a scalpel, not a hammer. 3. He loaded the driveline, clutch half in, a whisper of throttle, to take slack out of gears and axles. 2. He set his right foot so brake and throttle were both alive under one sole, left hand loose, right shoulder dropped. 1. He let the clutch slip a heartbeat longer than the others. The Supra jumped clean, no axle tramp, no wheel hop, just the rear tires giving up a skinny ribbon of slip that multiplied traction by growing the contact patch through a soft, controlled smear of rubber. Longitudinal weight transfer pressed the rear down. He fed, not stabbed, the throttle, letting the turbo spool under load so it wouldn't overshoot target boost and kick the tail. The RX-7 lit sideways and corrected. The Auto Supra rocketed. But Neal wasn't in a drag race. He was in a geometry lesson. First exit. A sweeping right with late camber and a decreasing radius that tricked hot heads into early apexes. He braked in a measured squeeze, not a jab, trail braking to carry load onto the front tires while the chassis rotated. Grip is finite. Physics is honest if you are. Ask for less steering if you're asking for more brake. He bled pressure as he added angle, felt the nose bite and the rear go light like a held breath. He let it breathe. A whisper of throttle shifted weight aft, balancing the car on the edge of its friction circle. The wheel unwound itself in his palms, always the sign he'd done it right. Don't trust shine, trust load, trust exit. Behind, a ripple. That delivery rider, late to the party, knifed down the shoulder, oblivious to the physics lesson he was about to join. The Auto Supra dove for the inside, boxed by a concrete barrier. Neal saw the lines converge 2 seconds early, an eternity at 85. Defend the apex and risk the rider's life, or float half a lane wider and lose time. He lifted 1%, just 1. The rear settled. He took a late apex, carving a V out of a corner that begged for a U, and let the auto shoot the inside, then over-undered it with torque and traction on exit. Time lost, lives kept. The rider sliced through danger he never knew he had. Wait forward until the car points. Wait back before the rear asks a question. Smooth hands, honest feet. The city wants spectacle. Maya wants oxygen. The cloverleaf came next, uphill and murderous to brakes. He rolled an ankle for a clean heel toe, blipping the throttle to match engine speed with the lower gear so the rear tires didn't get a driveline shock. Revs rose to meet the gear. The car accepted the downshift like a truth. He set a double apex, kiss inside, float a lane, cut in again where elevation stole speed for him. Throttle was a scalpel, just enough to hold the rear neutral, neither helping nor hindering, only allowing rotation. The RX-7 copied the shape and snapped loose, a Scandinavian flick executed like a story about a story. Left to load the right side springs, then right to rotate, but too hard, too late. Correction devoured distance. Physics graded on a curve, talent set the curve. Neal breathed through his teeth, a metronome in human shape. The Supra rewarded him. Fronts warm enough to talk back, rears warm enough to obey. Off-camber leftover patched asphalt, a liar of a corner. He feathered brake to keep a gram of weight on the nose, letting front contact patches write letters to the road. They spelled caution. He answered with a short clutch kick drift at the apex. Not for show, but to pivot in space the corner didn't give. Clutch in, throttle jab, clutch out. The engine spiked, the rear stepped just enough. Counter steer now, then catch it with throttle like catching a falling glass. A few degrees of attitude, clean rotation, pointed at traction's front door. Straighten, feed power, listen to the turbo sing in mid-range where torque is a promise kept. The final sweeper unwound into a short straight and a hazard tape finish lined with hungry mouths. The Auto Supra sniffed his bumper. Neal widened entry to protect minimum speed and swore not to chase the line, chase the exit. He rolled back to throttle as he unwound the wheel, letting lateral acceleration trade for longitudinal push. The engine surged through 4,800 RPM into that fat torque plateau that pressed spine into seat foam and narrowed vision to a silver-edged tunnel. The auto went early on throttle, early into drift, early into correction, late into regret, scrubbing speed with steering, the most expensive currency in a corner. Neal crossed a car length ahead and didn't lift until the line burned behind him. Lifting early is a lie you tell yourself when you think the worst is over. The worst wasn't. A marshal parked the Pelican case in his trunk like a bomb and said, "Proof of life is at the drop." The Supra ticked as heat escaped to air. He needed more car for what was coming, and more is never free. Ava Park slid from the crowd, all knuckles and competence. "You did that on a stock intercooler," she said. "Heat soak will gut you by race 2. "Then cut it out," he answered. Under a warehouse lamp the color of old paper, they made the Supra honest where it counted. A larger front-mount intercooler swapped heat soak for denser charge air. A high-flow catted downpipe and freer exhaust lowered back pressure so the turbo spooled earlier and stayed happier. A flex fuel sensor let them run an E30 blend that cooled the charge and shrugged at knock. A conservative ECU map kept air fuel rich under heat and capped torque to spare the clutch. A pad and fluid swap with a front camber tweak to minus 2.0 degrees sharpened turn-in without making the car twitchy mid-corner. Tools clicked like metronomes. The physics soothed him. Reduce charge temp, raise air density, burn safer fuel, and you convert chemical energy into motion with fewer apologies to friction. Ava's eyes flicked to her laptop. Vale will script the next one. He doesn't bet, he prices. Your rivals will get your telemetry. How? Piggyback on your OBD to ride the CAN bus, or scrape the RFID at the line and play your last session into their ears like prophecy. He wants you to drive a ghost he's already monetized. Neal looked at the silent Pelican case in the trunk and felt worse because it didn't rattle. Can you jam him? Not yet. But make your torque predictable only to you. Short shift at 5,203rd. The new intercooler keeps the pull alive in fourth. If it rains, hunt the pale gray, not the rubbered groove. He nodded. Where's proof of life? Under the bridge. The drop spot was where the city pretended not to exist, under a river span that hummed with commuter weight and old gum. Vale's man stood in the half-dark and held up a phone. Maya, wrists in matte cuffs, breathing shallow but steady beside a glowing keypad. Final race has a beacon at the finish, he said. When Mr. Vale's car crosses it, that keypad turns green. She stands up. He let the threat breathe on its own. Bring your best. Bring your worst. We don't care which wins. The feed died before Neal could say anything worth regretting. He leaned on the fender and felt warmth through his jacket. They want me to choose the wrong problem, he thought. Don't choose. Design. He pictured a finish line that wasn't a line but a switch, something he could flip without handing Vale the knight. Plans grow out of data and pain. He had enough of one and was collecting the other. The 6-speed felt tighter when he slid back in, and he realized Ava had slipped in a short-throw shifter without mentioning it. He smiled despite himself and let it fade. Rain's coming. Wet line, smooth weight, honest feet. Remember what this is for. The phone vibrated again. A location pin for the next race, a cloud icon, another pin for a mountain road. Vale was laying out a trail like a man who'd already drafted the obituary. Neal turned the keyless knob, felt the idle settle at a slightly higher pitch, denser air, richer fuel, a promise the car could now keep, and pulled into the night. Rain freckles began to tap the windshield as Neal rolled out from under the bridge, the Supra's new idle a touch higher, denser, as if the car had taken a deeper breath. City lights smeared across the hood in streaks, and the wipers made thin parentheses on the glass. With the storm building, his mind did what it always did before risk. It sorted the people he trusted, and the mistakes he refused to repeat. Ava came first, not because she was safer, but because she was precise in a way that made danger behave. They'd met 5 years ago at a Pro-Am drift weekend where Neal was all feel and bravado, and his front tires were feathered to the cords from a bad alignment he'd been too stubborn to fix. Ava had stepped into his pit like she already owned the space, pointed at the wear pattern and said, "You're making the shoulders do the work of the whole tread." She chalked camber lines, bumped the plates, dialed in tow, and sent him back out. The car rotated without the snatch he'd been fighting. No sudden bite, no fake drama. When he parked, she handed him a water and a printout. "Data is a language," she said, not smiling yet. "I'm fluent." "You're fluent in feel. We can talk." They didn't date, not really. They circled the idea the way you circle a decreasing radius corner. Curious, cautious, unwilling to throw the car at it before you see the exit. The wreck that ended Neal's sanctioned ambitions happened that same season. A sponsor wanted a big entry, more smoke, more angle, camera bait. Neal took it. He feinted left to load the right side springs, snapped right, clutch kicked, and the rear came around with more energy than the front tires could govern. The tail swung, the chassis yawed, and the passenger, an eager rookie observing from the right seat, bumped helmet to roll cage hard enough to break a wrist. A small injury, a minor note on a medical chart. In Neal's head, it was a siren. He'd asked the car for more rotation than the contact patches could supply, and the friction circle had sent him a bill. Ava didn't say "I told you so." She brought him the data and sat quietly while he stared at the numbers. After that, when he drifted, he did it on streets with no judges and no sponsors, where the only expectations were the ones he set. Ava stayed anyway, grease on her knuckles and graphs on her laptop. The only person who could tell him his hands were lying without making him defensive. Maya arrived in his life like a reporter does, with a notebook, a recorder, and questions that kept sharpening as you answered them. She'd come to the tuner shop to profile the gray economy of night mechanics, expecting cowboys and chaos, and instead found torque specs on a whiteboard and Neal lecturing a kid about why you blip the throttle on a downshift. He drew a crude friction circle on a pizza box and tapped it with a marker. "This is grip," he told her. "You can spend it on turning or on braking or on going. You can't spend the same dollar twice. If you're sliding, you're overdrafted." She kept the pizza box, grease spots and all, and wrote a piece that didn't glorify anything. It respected competence and warned about consequence. They got coffee. They argued about whether street racing was resistance or irresponsibility. He teased her for recording their arguments. She teased him for talking in numbers when he meant feelings. He never called it anything, but he started watching for her bylines the way you check mirrors before a lane change. Often, and with the sense that what you don't see can still hurt you. When Maya pivoted to investigating the betting exchange that turned races into fixed commodities, Neal told her Vale was a different kind of danger. "He doesn't race you," Neal said. "He prices you." Maya grinned like a climber at the base of a route, headlamp beam already finding holds. "Then the story isn't the drivers," she said. "It's the odds." She kept him at arm's length from her sources, partly to protect him, partly because she didn't want him trying to steer the ethics of her work. He respected that boundary, mostly. The last time they spoke in person, they were on a loading dock behind the shop, their breath fogging in the cold. She played a voice memo of a bookmaker complaining about Vale's beacon. She asked what it could be. He didn't know then. He knows now. Ava and Maya recognized something in each other that Neal could never quite name. Maybe it was the habit of gathering truth, one in numbers and one in words. They weren't friends at first. They were two gravity wells tugging the same object, Neal, into different orbits. Ava wanted him disciplined and alive. Maya wanted him honest and on record. Over time, they found a truce in the overlap. A shared contempt for men like Vale, who turned skill into leverage and people into lines on a ledger. When Maya disappeared, Ava didn't ask if they should get involved. She opened the laptop and started a new project called Beacon. When Neal told her Vale wanted him to win his way, Ava said, "Then we cut the script out of the car." The rain thickened into a sheet fine enough to make the asphalt look like black glass. Neal eased the Supra through traffic, left foot hovering to brush the brake now and then to dry the pads and keep the discs warm. A small, constant tax that paid back the first time you asked for bite in the wet. He hunted the pale gray parts of the lane where tires hadn't polished the aggregate into a skating rink, avoiding the dark, rubbered groove that would be slickest now. Every stoplight was a lesson in weight transfer. Squeeze the pedal to move load forward without pitching. Keep the rear tires honest by not asking them to steer and brake at once. Roll back onto the throttle only as the wheel unwinds, so longitudinal demand replaces lateral instead of stacking on top of it. The car felt different after the upgrades, more eager, but also cleaner in the way it delivered that eagerness. Intake temps stayed low. The ECU's timing didn't yank itself away at the first sign of heat. He could feel it in the way the engine didn't wilt after a long pull, in the way fourth gear now had a second wind instead of a sigh. At the next red, memory rose uninvited. Maya's laugh caught on tape because she never turned the recorder off. Ava's frown when Neal's hands lied to his mouth, and she could see it on the trace. He'd walked both of them too close to this edge. Maya, by underestimating how quickly a story turns into a trap. Ava by making her a co-conspirator in a rescue that could go very wrong. The guilt tried to spill over into the pedals the way panic tries to spill into a corner. He contained it with the same discipline. Do one thing at a time, and do it completely. Right now, the job was to arrive at the next grid with brakes warm, tires at a temperature that made sense for water, and a plan for where the grip would be even if no one else could see it. The pin for Race 2 sat ahead by the river, where a bridge funneled wind and rain into a tunnel that magnified every mistake. Vale would seed the course with easy lies, the bright dry line that was actually oil rising through water, the obvious late apex that wasn't, the temptation to brake in a straight line longer than you should because it felt safe. Safe wastes grip. Safe is sometimes slow, sometimes deadly, often both. Neal listened to the rain on the roof and thought about the last real fight he'd had with Maya, when she told him he hid in technique because it was easier than admitting what he feared. Technique is how you put fear to work, he'd said. It's how you make the car tell the truth. She'd nodded, unconvinced but not dismissive, and changed the subject to coffee. He wished he'd said the rest out loud. The staging area emerged in the wet glow, sodium lamps boiling the air into gold. Cars idled in two loose rows, exhaust pluming like breath in winter. Faces turned as the Supra rolled in, some measuring, some admiring, some already pricing him the way Vale did. Ava stepped from under a half-closed bay door, with a coil of radio wire in one hand and a grease pencil in the other. She drew a small X at the top of his windshield on the passenger side. "Eye anchor," she said. "When it goes white with spray, fix your eyes here, not on the bumper in front of you. Peripheral will do the rest." She leaned in, her voice low under the rain. "Wet line. Left foot brush to keep the pads honest. Short shift at 5 to 2. And if they try to feed you your own ghost, ignore it. Feel is faster than numbers when numbers are lying." Neal nodded, jaw set. The rain found the seam at his collar and ran cold down his spine, a physical reminder that the environment was always part of the equation. He thought of Maya in a chair beside a keypad waiting for a light to change, of Ava's hands moving through the engine bay like a surgeon who takes it personally when a body fights back, of the first time he understood that the friction circle wasn't a limit so much as a budget you could respect or steal from. He closed his eyes for one breath, then opened them and watched the drops turn the road into a mirror. Technique, he told himself, the word a mantra that contained more than it said. One thing at a time. Do it completely. He rolled the Supra forward to the line. Rain thickened to a gauze as the grid tightened under the bridge, spray drifting like smoke across the sodium glow. Neal fixed his eyes on the little grease pencil X Ava had drawn at the top right of his windshield, the eye anchor, so the blizzard of taillights and rooster tails wouldn't drag his gaze where it didn't belong. He eased the Supra forward, left foot brushing the brake every few seconds to keep pads dry, feeling the tiny nib of friction return with each touch. Wet halves the world, and then halves it again. The coefficient of friction falls, the rubbered groove turns to ice, and the safe places become treacherous. The only advantage he had tonight was that his Michelin Street tires still had siping to slice the water film. He hunted the pale gray aggregate outside the usual line where the stones kept teeth, refusing the dark polish that invited hydroplaning at speeds that used to feel trivial. The starter's arm dropped, and the pack exploded into a roar muffled by rain. Neal loaded the driveline like before, but launched softer, feeding throttle to keep the turbo in the meat without shocking the rear. Longitudinal load pushed the tail down. Crosswind on the bridge tried to peel it sideways. He answered the wind by setting the car a degree into it, a sailor trimming for gusts, hands quiet while the chassis talked. Ahead, brake lights strobed at the first kink. Panic, not planning. He kept his squeeze linear, trail braking just past turn-in so weight stayed on the nose long enough to bite, then bleeding off as he added steering. The wet line put him a lane higher than habit. The car felt wrong until it felt right, front speaking in a fine grit buzz that meant the tread blocks were still deforming, still squeegeeing water, not surfing it. The tunnel mouth swallowed sound and threw it back compressed. Grip changed all at once here, less water under the tires, but concrete polished by 30 years of tires and oil. The pack bunched. His rivals had his ghost in their ears. Vale's people piping in a model of Neal's usual throttle traces and shift points. He could tell by the way the silver sedan to his left tried to pre-block the inside a beat before he would have gone there in the dry. Good. Let them defend a line he wasn't taking. He short-shifted at 5.2, exactly as Ava had told him, keeping the engine in the fat band and the rear composed. The swerve of spray at bumper height turned the tunnel into a strobe-lit rumor of a road. He kept his eyes pinned to the X, trusted peripheral to read taillight drift and spray density as proxies for grip. Thicker mist meant someone up there had found a lake. Halfway through the tube, a hazard. A rideshare Prius wobbling, lost in the wrong world at the wrong time, and a black coupe 2 cars up angling to sideswipe it on Vale's order. The cleanest way to bait carnage and free air for the favorites. Neal saw the geometry collapsing 3 cars ahead and 1 lane over, a slow-motion equation about to resolve in blood. Choice, quick and precise. Block the hit and give up position, or take the space the coupe would vacate and pretend he hadn't seen it. He lifted 2%, slid a half-car left, and used engine braking like a hand on the back of the Supra to set its nose. The wet helped him here. The little weight shift was enough. He placed his right front fender alongside the coupe's left rear. No contact, just a hard suggestion. The driver flinched, aborted the sideswipe, and washed wide on the polished concrete. The Prius skittered through, oblivious to the life it kept. Neal had lost momentum in 2 places, but he still had a mirror without a ghost in it. Exiting the tunnel, the world became water again. A sheet had formed where the bridge deck crowned and dipped. Cars ahead threw plumes tall as trash cans. Hydroplaning happens when a tire can't squeegee the water away fast enough and rides up on a wedge. Pressure and tread depth set the threshold, and these weren't slicks. He aimed for the crown, toes light, and let the car skip once, half a heartbeat on top of the world, and settle as the tread found purchase. The sedan that had pre-blocked him earlier hit the puddle in the groove, not the crown, and slewed sideways, spraying a curtain so dense it might as well have been a wall. He was already left, already past. The off-ramp waited like a trap. Decreasing radius, off-camber, painted lines slick as glass. Most would brake hard in a straight line and turn late, then fight the inevitable push mid-corner and add steering until the fronts surrendered. Neal did the opposite. He braked earlier but lighter, carried a gram of pressure into the turn to keep the nose keyed, then gave the smallest lift to move weight forward 1 more tick. The tail offered to rotate. He accepted, but only with permission. Left foot brushed the brake as his right held a whisper of throttle. 2 hands on one scale, keeping the sum under the friction circle's ceiling. The car yawed just enough that the corner shortened beneath him, the attitude precise rather than theatrical. In the wet, a clutch kick was a lie. Finesse was truth. Back on the boulevard, the black coupe returned, a fighter who'd recovered his nerve, and tried the same order a different way, late merging to squeeze a commuter into Neal's lane so he'd brake or bully. Neal adjusted a tire's width, keeping his own space without closing the others, and watched the coupe's mirrors. Fear shows as eyes that stick where they should flick. The man was looking at Neal, not the road. Good. He showed him a brake light a beat early, not a stab, just enough red to plant the idea, then trailed deeper than the coupe expected into the next medium right. The other driver braked too hard, too straight. The nose dove, the rears lightened. The car asked a question its hands couldn't answer. Neal rotated under him and unwound onto the short straight with the engine squarely in the torque shelf, the turbo singing through dense, cool air that made promises it could keep. Spray thinned as the pack stretched. His line turned into arithmetic. Look for the stipple on the surface where the aggregate showed. Avoid arrows and manhole covers. Feed throttle only as the wheel unwound so lateral became longitudinal, rather than a compounded debt. He could feel the ECU's new map keeping timing where heat would have stolen it last week. Fourth gear didn't wilt after a long pull anymore. Near the final set of curves, an S into a short straight bounded by concrete, he set the car early left to load the right side springs, then snapped back right with just enough yaw that the rear followed on a leash, not a lunge. A rival behind tried to mimic and made the same mistake the RX-7 had in the dry. A story about a story, too much amplitude for the friction on offer. The road measured him and subtracted. The finish lived just beyond a shallow kink, hazard tape fluttering like wet flags. The silver sedan shot for the inside, counting on Neal to guard. He didn't. He widened entry, dragged the brake a breath deeper to keep the nose keyed, then rolled onto the throttle as the steering straightened, letting the car eat the last meters with all 4 contact patches contributing. The sedan, tight on the inside, ran out of radius and had to add wheel with power still on, scrubbing away what little speed the line promised. Neal crossed first by half a hood, the sort of win that looks inevitable only in hindsight. He held throttle to the cones, then lifted cleanly and let the car coast while the rain hissed on the hot exhaust. He could smell the pads, not cooked, just worked, and the sweet ethanol breath of E30 in the air. Ava was at his window before the wipers finished a sweep, eyes on the tires, then the rotors, then his face. "They fed them your ghost," she said, "from the dry." They were blocking emptiness. He nodded, breathing evening out, heartbeat settling to something he could think through. "They tried to use a commuter as a hinge," he said. "I took the hinge." "I heard," she replied, tapping her scanner. "Cops are busy 2 exits north. We've got a window." Under a metal awning that drummed like a snare, they tore into stage 2. The stock front brakes came off for a 6-piston big brake kit with larger rotors, more torque, more thermal mass, less fade. Forged 19-inch wheels replaced the heavier cast set, shaving unsprung weight so the dampers could follow the wet road instead of skipping across it. Tire widths stepped up to 265 front, 295 rear, more rubber, but with a squarish overall balance so the car would still turn on throttle instead of plowing. Ava slid a 1.5-way limited slip differential center in place of the softer unit, steeper ramp angles that locked predictably under power while staying civil off throttle. Chassis braces tied the front subframe to the strut towers, a quiet reinforcement you felt as initial response, rather than stiffness for its own sake. Alignment got a hair more front camber and a whisper of toe-out to sharpen turn-in without making the car darty on the freeway sprint that awaited. Neal watched the rain draw diagonal lines across the alley and felt, beneath the fatigue, a thin current of calm. The car was becoming the tool the night demanded, stronger brakes to buy late decisions, wider contact patches to keep the budget honest, a differential that would stop wasting single-tire spins and turn throttle into rotation when he asked. He thought of Maya in a chair beside a keypad and of Vale somewhere dry, counting outcomes he believed he owned. The phone buzzed. A new pin, this one gray-green and higher in the map, the mountain road that locals drove in daylight with empty trunks and good sense. Pre-dawn fog would pool in the bowls and drape the ridges. The surface would flip from coarse to smooth and back, painting grip in invisible stripes. Neal slid behind the wheel, felt the pedal under his foot, firmer now, higher bite, and set his palms on the leather at 9 and 3. Technique is how you put fear to work. One thing at a time. Do it completely. He pulled out, the Supra's exhaust a muted promise under the rain, and pointed the nose toward the hills. The climb toward the hills began with a series of gentle stops, 60 down to 10, again and again, because new rotors and pads don't owe you anything until you earn them. Neal bedded the brakes in the rain the way a surgeon warms hands before a first incision, methodically, no glaze, no hot spots. Each diesel moved weight forward like a measured pour, the front contact patches broadening, tread blocks flexing and squeegeeing the film away. Between cycles, he let the pedal breathe so resin could cure instead of cook. The car rewarded patience with a firmer bite and a higher, cleaner pedal, confidence he could spend later without overdrafting the friction circle. Water ran in silver threads off the crown of the boulevard as the city fell behind, and with it the noise that kept him from thinking about why Maya was taken. Maya was abducted because she'd found the part of Vale's machine that wasn't a story. It was proof. Not just rumors about paid cops or salted hazards, but the ledger that made it math. She'd mapped live odds movements against telemetry spikes scraped from cars at grid, correlated those with unforced errors that suddenly weren't. One driver's brake fade arriving 3 corners early, another's fuel cut exactly where a side bet paid for a DNF. In her notes, neat block letters, dates underlined once, she called it pricing the race. To write that phrase, she'd first followed a whisper to a bookmaker named Finch, who bragged off-record about a beacon Vale used to close the loop. She didn't know what beacon meant then. She learned when a disgruntled marshal messaged her a photo of a gray tile welded under a Finnish gantry, its face scratched like a well-worn key. The tile was an RFID/ultra-wideband hybrid that served 2 purposes. It time-stamped cars to settle bets and, on its own secure channel, talked to a paired restraint box. If Vale's car crossed first, the tile whispered green to a keypad miles away. If he didn't, it stayed red. A ransom built into a race. She was careful until she wasn't. Vale seeded her a source, what looked like a telemetry tech from the exchange, who dangled a thumb drive and a conscience. The meat was set for the kind of liminal place that turns handoffs into disappearances, a loading bay with a dead camera and a roll-up door that cried louder than men. Neal had told her, months earlier, that Vale doesn't race, he prices. She'd turned that line into a thesis and worked it until names became numbers. When she crossed the bay's yellow line, Vale priced her too. The cuffs, the keypad, the live feed, those were not improvisations. They were his proof of concept that a man who owned data owned decisions, and that he could make a driver like Neal spend grip, not on the road, but on his conscience. Neal's jaw set as the road angled up and the rain thinned to a cool mist. The Supra's limited slip whispered through a slow, empty roundabout, throttle adding a touch of lock, the rear following the front instead of freelancing, and he felt the car grow more honest under him with every mile. Dedication for him lived in ordinary motions done precisely, the way he checked mirrors not for cops, but for the stories people wrote about him with their headlights, the way he looked past brake lights to the texture of the lane, the way he rehearsed a wet line entry in his head so often that the muscles of his right foot learned to be gentle without asking permission from fear. He had never told Maya he loved her because the word felt like a headline, loud, flattened, waiting to be taken out of context. What he could say without saying it was, "I will not let your breath be a wager." He could translate love into a choice of line that saved a stranger on a scooter, into a lifted 1% that turned a trap into a lane, into patience with betting pads in the rain because later, when it mattered, bite would arrive exactly when he asked for it. He replayed, not for the first time, the last fight they'd had. Her accusing him of hiding in technique because it kept him from declaring anything out loud. Him arguing that technique was how you carried fear without spilling it. She'd laughed, soft, tired, and told him he sounded like a manual. He'd wanted to tell her manuals keep people alive, but the words had felt defensive, so he'd offered coffee instead. Now, alone with the wipers and the hum, he admitted the rest. He loved the way her recorder clicked on in the middle of a sentence and stayed on through the silence after. He loved that she kept his pizza box friction circle under her desk like a relic. He loved the way she looked at a hazard and named the person it would hurt before she named the angle it would sell. Fog began to pool in the mouths of side streets as elevation climbed. The mountain's first switchbacks were still 20 minutes ahead, but the road had already started speaking a different dialect. Aggregate coarser, drainage ditches cut deeper, paint lines raised just enough to trip a tire if you rode them blind. Neal treated the drive like a reconnaissance lap at half speed. He felt for camber by watching how water ran, where it veed off the crown, where it lingered in dark bruises, where it made stars under the sodium lamps. He tested the new differential's manners with a slow, deliberate throttle roll mid-corner and felt rotation arrive like a conversation instead of a shove. This kind of listening was also a love letter. To the road, to the car, to the person whose life depended on him reading both without making them carry his panic. He thought of the Pelican case in his trunk, of the beacon at the finish, of Vale's voice that sounded like a man who'd never sworn at a stripped bolt. Vale believed in levers. Neal believed in hands. Vale believed in designing a choice that made the better man hang himself. Neal believed in writing a third option with brake pressure and steering angle a mortal hair apart. Dedication here wasn't white-knuckle bravado. It was the refusal to let someone else define the geometry of his choices. He would not let the beacon decide whether Maya breathed. He would make the beacon serve the truth. At a turnout overlooking a black bowl of city lights, he stopped long enough to feel the engine tick as heat moved to air. The rain had eased to lint. Ava's text buzzed. Tooge stage set. Fog heavy. Watch KM7. Patched tar plus off camber. Then, a second line. I spoofed partial can. Not enough to blind them. Enough to make your ghost stutter. Trust feel. He smiled, small and private. Technique turned feelings into actions. Love turned actions into vows. He put the Supra back in gear and let the clutch bring the car and the promise together, climbing toward a road he'd treat like a question, with only one acceptable answer. Maya alive, and the night's geometry bent just enough to make room for it. Fog unspooled across the first switchbacks like gauze tugged from a wound, and the mountain road switched from slick city glass to coarse, toothy aggregate that bit through the water film. Neal treated the opening kilometer as a measuring cup. Brake squeeze to feel initial bite, a small unwind to test how quickly lateral could trade for longitudinal, throttle feathered to verify the new differential's manners. The 1.5-way LSD answered cleanly. Off throttle, it stayed polite. On throttle, it built lock predictably, turning pedal pressure into rotation instead of scrub. He set his eyes long, through the corner, not at it, because fog turns near vision into lies, and locked his breathing to his inputs so nothing came in spikes. The Stage 2 brakes paid back the betting with a higher, firmer pedal. Weight went forward like a steady pour, not a slosh. The pack launched on a marshal's flashlight rather than a flag, the beam a white slash swallowed by mist, and the road narrowed to a ribbon flanked by guardrail and drop. The first hairpin came fast and mean, camber falling away as if the mountain had shrugged. Most drivers would pitch the car, let yaw do the steering, then chase the slide. In the wet, show turned into debt. Neal braked in a straight, bled into turn-in to keep the front keyed, then allowed a whisper of rotation by easing off the pedal the moment he added angle. The rear asked to step. He answered with the gentlest throttle brush, just enough drive to lengthen the rear contact patches and keep slip angle where the tread still squeegeed water. No clutch kick here. This was surgery, not theater. The Supra pivoted without a flinch, engine sitting squarely on that flat torque shelf where every millimeter of throttle means something and nothing surprises the tires. Fog thickened in the bowls, pooled where the road's crown went missing under patchwork tar. At kilometer 7, Ava's text in his head, off camber plus seam sewed a trap. The car ahead, a wide-body Z with more aero than sense, took the obvious line and hit the tar snake mid-corner. The temperature difference made the patch slick. Rubber skated, rear snapped, and the driver caught it with hands instead of feet, adding steering instead of shifting load. The Z pendulumed, gathered, lost, gathered, each catch stealing more speed than the slide. Neal changed the problem instead of fighting it. He set the car a foot higher on the lane, away from the seam, feathered the brake to pin the nose for one more heartbeat, then rolled throttle so the rear lengthened into grip. He cleared the corner with a meter to spare and a lesson banked. In the wet, the line is wherever the microtexture still has bite. Vale's ghost tried to haunt him again. You could tell when rivals moved in sync with an imaginary Neal. Even their mistakes had his rhythm from the dry. A silver hatch slid to block early on a medium right, as if precognizing his usual turn-in. He delayed half a beat, turned later and sharper, and let the car rotate under trail brake so the apex arrived to meet him instead of the other way around. The hatch's pre-block planted it offline for the exit. It had to add wheel with throttle still on, burning speed in the most expensive currency. The Supra walked by with the calm of a sum done right. On a long uphill sweeper where fog shredded into columns between the trees, Neal short-shifted at 5.2 as Ava had mapped, keeping the motor in the thick band and the rear settled. He could feel the intercooler earning its keep. The intake temps stayed low. Timing didn't yank itself away at the first 60 seconds of effort, so fourth gear carried like a promise, not a pant. A deer's eyes flashed at the verge, a pair of coins tossed by the mountain. He eased a degree of angle out of the wheel, let the car straighten a breath to widen the safety margin, then put the angle back in with the same smoothness. No jabs, no asks, the contact patch couldn't fund. The course pinched at a rock cut, concrete on the left, stone on the right, both wet enough to reflect his headlights back into his own eyes. The black coupe from the bridge reappeared, aggressive again, and tried a dive on entry, counting on Neal to look and brake. He didn't look, he felt, fronts buzzing with micro-texture, rears whispering lock building under power. He showed the coupe a brake light a shade early, the faint red suggestion that a lesser driver would chase, then stayed on a long, linear squeeze while he added angle. The coupe stabbed too hard where the surface polished, ABS chattered, weight pitched, and the rear asked a question it was too busy to hear. Neal rotated inside the chatter and exited with the wheel already unwinding, throttle opening only as lateral bled to longitudinal, never stacking asks, always trading them. By the upper hairpins, the pack had stretched into pairs and singles. Neal's hands stayed at 9 and 3, his feet wrote in cursive rather than block letters, and the Supra answered like a tool that had learned its owner. He thought of Maya, not as an abstract rescue, but as the person who kept a grease-stained pizza box under her desk because a crude circle helped her explain risk to readers who didn't count in degrees and psi. The thought didn't make him faster, it made him exact. Precision was how you told the truth when everything else wanted drama. The final sector ran along a ridge where wind tore the fog into flags. A marshal's van loomed at the makeshift finish, hazard lights pulsing, and beyond it the drop back into the city's black bowl. Neal protected the exit rather than the apex, dragged the brake 3 feet longer than instinct to keep the front keyed, then rolled on power as the wheel unwound. The car behind, different silver, same ghost, cut tight, ran out of road, and scrubbed. Neal crossed the tape first by a clean car length. No fist pump, no howl. He held throttle to the van, then eased off and took the cool down with the kind of relief that never leaves the pedals. Ava reached him before the brake tick faded, hair pasted to her temples by mist, laptop under one arm, torque wrench under the other. Telemetry scrape stuttered, she said, eyes scanning rotors, tires, his face. My jam's working, not perfect. They're still getting beats, just the wrong ones. He nodded, eyes already on the gradient dropping toward the docks. Final's a stitched loop. He'll make it a carnival. He'll make it a market, she corrected, then lowered her voice. One more thing. Their chatter mentioned Ghost 9, Vale's pet project. Think predictive vectoring, forward-looking thermal, active arrow that breathes. Street legal if your lawyer lives in a safe. If you get Maya, you won't just win, you'll need to leave. She handed him a drive. Stage 3 map, full E85. Bigger turbos on the cart. Oil cooler, radiator, clutch, half cage, aero. We do it now or we don't finish later. They pushed the Supra under a canopy where mist condensed and fell in fat drops. Wrenches clinked, lines bled. A new compressor housing gleamed like a threat. The upgraded HPFP went in with a sound like a stubborn truth finally seating. The sax clutch gave the pedal a deeper spring, a promise that torque would stop being polite. A half cage slid in and turned the cabin into a commitment. Splitter, canards, and a subtle ducktail added the kind of downforce that keeps faith on freeway speeds without turning curbs into enemies. The radiator and oil cooler bought minutes of honesty when the gauntlet demanded continuous punishment. The E85 map and larger turbo bought the right to accelerate out of bad decisions without making new ones. While Ava torqued and typed, Neal stood in the damp and let the mountains cold in through his collar. He pictured the finish beacon like a switch he could flip without handing Vale the knight. He pictured Maya's cuff light turning green because he had turned Vale's lever against him. He pictured a convoy of blacked-out sedans, and Vale at the point in a car with more computation than conscience. The final would decide who got to breathe. The escape after would decide who got to keep deciding. He slid into the seat, felt the firmer pedal and the heavier, more honest shifter, and rested his palms at 9 and 3. The engine lit with a deeper timbre, boost built sooner and stayed. "We win clean," he said, more to himself than to Ava. "We take her. And when Ghost 9 shows its teeth, we write a new geometry." Ava clicked the laptop shut and wiped rain from the windshield's corner X. "Then let's give the night a problem it didn't price." He eased the Supra out of the bay, new turbo spooling like a low vow, and pointed the nose back toward the city where the stitched loop waited, and beyond it, the unavoidable fact of escape. The city slid back toward him in bands of light and wet pavement, and with the bigger turbo breathing low and steady, Neal let the Supra run at a pace that matched his thoughts. When words wouldn't behave, he translated feelings into the language his hands trusted. Love, for him, wasn't speed. It was stability under load. With Maya, he could feel the difference between horsepower and torque, the headline number that impresses on paper and the low, steady pull that moves real weight in bad conditions. She was torque. She made hard things tractable, not by drama, but by giving the moment a shoulder and pushing. Boundaries used to be a fuzzy thing he stepped over without meaning to, then apologized for later. Brakes gave him a better picture. You don't stab them and hope. You squeeze and hold, and the car answers in clean weight transfer instead of panic. With Maya, good boundaries felt like a firm pedal, clear, predictable, high. That's how she set lines in interviews, how she refused to trade someone's dignity for a better quote. He wanted to be that pedal for her, there when pressed, the same every time, never fading when the hill got long. He thought about alignment the way Ava taught him to see it: camber, caster, toe. Not as numbers, but intent. Too much front camber, and you turn beautifully for a lap, then cord your shoulders and bleed away your future. Too little, and you understeer into the barriers you swore you'd avoid. With Maya, camber was how much he allowed himself to lean into them, to take the bite of the moment on the part of himself that could use it. Toe out sharpens turn in, but makes you twitchy on the freeway. Toe in calms the car at speed, but slows your reaction when a corner surprises you. Their friendship had been a careful compromise, a whisper of toe out so they could pivot into hard conversations quickly, not so much that they vibrated themselves apart on the long straight of ordinary days. He'd felt that in the way they could go from coffee to confession without hitting a guardrail, then coast in silence without the drift turning into distance. Rev matching had always felt like empathy disguised as technique. You don't yank someone into your pace and call it connection. You blip, you meet them where they are, and then the downshift doesn't shock either of you. With Maya, he wanted to be a perfect heel toe. See her cadence, match it, let the gear change happen without the jolt that makes you both resent the move. In the tunnel earlier, when he used engine braking to set the nose and protect the Prius, he realized he'd been doing a version of it for months in conversation. Lift a breath, make space, let her settle, then carry the speed together. The friction circle was the oldest pizza box sermon he had, and it had become a way to budget his heart. You can't spend lateral and longitudinal at the same time without paying interest. You can't hold guilt and be fully present and still expect grip to be there when you turn. He'd been overdrafting since the wreck, spending on blame and then wondering why he washed wide in relationships. Maya had a way of making him put the ledger on the table and choose. Tonight, choosing meant keeping the budget honest. Spend on precision now so there's something left for courage later. Spend on listening in the wet corners so there's something left for speaking when the road dries. He laughed once, breath fogging the cabin, at the thought that the limited slip differential might be the best metaphor he'd ever had for partnership. An open diff, and the easy wheel spins uselessly while the loaded one sits still. A good LSD doesn't lock you into sameness. It shares load when it matters and frees you when it doesn't. Off throttle, you're allowed to be your own car. On throttle, when life leans hard, both axles contribute. With Maya, he wanted to be 1.5 way, predictable lock when pressure rose, grace when it fell. Cooling mattered more than power now that escape sat in the near future like a second course he hadn't ordered but would have to eat. The new radiator and oil cooler were patience, plain and simple. Without them, you go fast for a minute and then spend 10 limping. With them, you live in the sustained pull. Maya worked that way. She didn't chase the spicy quote. She built the story with airflow and time, heat leaving the system in ways no one watching could see. If he got her out, the night wouldn't be over. Vale and Ghost 9 would make sure of it. He would need patience more than peak, reserves more than a hero moment. He would need to be cool when computation hunted heat. He thought about anti-lag, a trick that poured raw exhaust energy past a spooled turbo, so boost was always there. In the wrong hands, it cooked hardware and turned minutes into smoke. In the right hands, it was readiness, without panic. That was what he wanted his love for her to be. Not frantic, not performative, just present and available the instant the situation asked. The half-cage behind his seat turned the thought into shape. Vulnerability, people like to say, but the word felt soft. The cage was how he understood it. You make a safe shape around the soft parts so impact doesn't define you. The harness was trust. You snap in not because you expect to crash, but because you expect to go fast near the edge and still walk away together. He rolled to a long red light where the boulevard bent toward the docks and watched water pool in a shallow dish near the curb. Headlights from the cross street strobed the cabin, every drop shining and then going dark. He pictured Maya's recorder in her pocket, still on, and spoke aloud so the words had to stand up. "You are the line I protect, not the apex I chase." It sounded corny, like something you'd print on a tee at a car meet, but the truth of it sat well in his chest. Chasing apexes gets you killed in decreasing radii. Protecting exits wins races and gets people home. The light changed, and he eased the clutch in with a patience he reserved for first gear in the wet. As the Supra flowed forward, he remembered the first time she'd caught him describing fear as load transfer. "You don't get rid of fear," he'd said, a little too proud of his metaphor. "You move it to the axle that can carry it." She'd rolled her eyes and then, days later, repeated it to a source who couldn't sort his guilt from his facts. It had worked. Maybe that was the real alignment between them. She could take his mechanic's language and bolt it onto human mess until it ran. Down by the waterfront, the stitched loop loomed in his head like a diagram he could almost see on the glass. Docklands into spiral ramp, into boulevard, into elevated. The beacon switch sat invisibly at one end. Vale's odds engine waited to turn it into a lever. He let his mind sketch plans not just to win, but to leave. Winning would unlock Maya. Leaving would keep her that way. Ghost 9 would be everything he hated about Vale dressed as something to admire. Predictive vectoring that guessed your next steering input. Thermal imaging that turned fog into map. Active aero that breathed with the road. Computation versus feel. If Maya was torque, then Ghost 9 was horsepower. Numbers that dazzled for investors. He smiled without warmth. Torque moves mass. Feel moves people. A text from Ava popped up on the dash. Freeway cams blind, 2 to 3 minutes after sprinter pass. Window on exit ramp C. He pictured cameras as spectators with slow blinks and felt gratitude come on like boost. Quiet, and then all at once. He typed a thumb reply at the next stop. Copy. Budgeting grip for after. The phrase made him think of Maya's ledger again. Her neat block letters converting rumor into math that could survive cross-examination. He wanted to be cross-examined by her and pass, to say out loud the things he'd been hiding behind technique and have them stand without charts. Later. First, the geometry. He turned off onto a frontage road that paralleled the docks and let the car idle along while he listened. The engine sounded deeper now, not louder, density where there used to be strain. He set his fingers lightly on the wheel and let the chassis tell him about wind through the spokes, the kind of information you only hear when you stop shouting with your hands. He thought of Maya asking a question and then letting silence do the rest. Silence was her trail break. Carry the weight just a little longer so the truth rotates into view. The loop entrance glowed ahead, hazard tape stirring in a lazy breeze. He checked mirrors, scanned for the incongruent, vans that didn't belong, faces that watched too still, gaps in traffic that felt curated. Whatever he felt for Maya, however he named it later, had to make a practical claim on the next hour. A line he would not cross, a line he would not surrender, a third line he would draw with brake pressure and steering angle so narrow only honesty could fit through. He breathed once, long and even, and rolled the Supra into the staging lane, where love would need to look like technique, because tonight that was the only language the city would obey. Drizzle thinned to a slick sheen by the time Neal rolled into the stitched loop staging lane. Dock cranes loomed like rib bones, and sodium lamps turned the wet concrete the color of nicotine. Marshals in black windbreakers moved with the bored efficiency of men who'd rehearsed bad ideas. One wrapped the Supra's roof and leaned in. Seating dash, one flying lap, sectors count for grid, don't clip the beacon, that's for the feature. The rule landed like a tell. Vale wanted them to learn the course without tripping his switch. Good. Neal needed a rehearsal, not a reveal. Ava tapped the windshield's little grease pencil X, then his dash. Map 2, she said. Rolling anti-lag is there if you need it. Don't cook it. Spiral ramp is slick concrete. Use a handbrake tick to set yaw, not rotation. Exit ramp C still has the camera blind window after the airport sprinter passes. If Vale salted bearings, you'll see marbles and sparkle on the ramp. Eyes up. Her voice was a steady metronome against the dockside wind. He nodded and eased forward as a marshal's flashlight carved him loose from the line. He built the lap like a proof, piece by piece, never spending the same grip twice. The Docklands entry was polished by forklifts and diesel. He stayed off the dark track, hunting the pale, toothy bands near the edges where aggregate still bit. The Stage 3 brakes felt like a promise, firm, high, linear, and weight came forward in a clean pour, not a slosh. He bled pressure as he added angle, letting the front tread block squeegee water while the rears waited their turn. Budget lateral now. Keep longitudinal for the straight. One ask at a time. The Supra pushed through second, torque coming in low and fat on E85 without the flabby heat he used to fight. He short-shifted at 5.2 and felt the big turbo keep the pull alive into fourth like a tide. The spiral parking ramp rose from the asphalt like a concrete auger, every lane stripe a wet lie. He toggled a breath of rolling anti-lag before turn-in, enough to keep boost awake, not enough to light the manifold like a kiln, then brushed the handbrake a thumb's width to set attitude. It wasn't a drift, not even a slide. It was a nudge that let the rear follow the front on a short leash, while the nose traced the inside barrier. He watched for sparkle. Ball bearings looked like confetti under sodium, but saw only the dull gray of old gum. Good. He trailed brake up the first coil to keep the fronts keyed, then fed throttle as he unwound on each mini-straight so lateral bled into forward, never stacked. Vertical load added its own math to the friction circle. He let the car breathe between coils so the tires didn't glaze. On the rooftop kink the wind hit crosswise, a palm shoving at the ducktail. The aero they'd added wasn't theater. Splitter and canards put real pounds on the nose at freeway speeds. But up here the gusts came in bursts. He set the car 1 degree into the wind, hands quiet, and let the chassis talk through the column. Tiny, dry Morse code that told him how the contact patches were feeling about the air. Stability under load, he thought, and felt the comparison arrive unbidden. Maya is torque. Ghost 9 will be horsepower. He put the thought away and asked the car for nothing but honesty. Down the ramp, engine braking a hand on the back of the chassis, he caught Sector 2 with a clean late apex that protected exit over ego. The boulevard felt wide until the road narrowed between Jersey barriers, the kind of pinch that makes even good drivers lean their shoulders. Ahead, a forklift had left a pallet jack skewed into the lane, a tidy phantom yellow veil used to see who chose caution and who could change the problem. Neal chose. Early brush of brake to plant the nose, then a short, precise throttle roll to lengthen the rear contact patches as he sliced by with inches to spare. The pallet jack rocked in his wake. His mirrors stayed boring, which was the point. The elevated freeway's on-ramp merged under a lattice of cameras with lazy blinks. Ava's text about the Sprinter bus came back to him like a line of a song. He timed the merge to the bus's approach, using its slabs of IR glass as a moving curtain. Cams blinked. He slipped under. Crosswind made the guardrail sing. He kept the car in the tram lines between painted arrows and tar seams, toes light, eyes anchored high where the road decided what it wanted to be. The ECU's map held timing like a friend who doesn't leave when the room gets hot. Fourth didn't wilt, and the oil temp crept but never scolded. He took Sector 3's last S as arithmetic. Left to load the right springs, settle, right with a whisper of trail brake so the front stayed in charge, unwind with throttle only as the wheel straightened. A silver car behind tried to pre-block a ghost line, anticipating a dry line apex that wasn't there tonight. Neal delayed turn in half a beat, rotated later, and watched the silver car run out of radius and dignity. The taped finish stuttered in the rain. He crossed it clean and deep and kept the throttle pinned to the cones, then breathed the car down like a patient, not a spectacle. Marshals waved him to a stop. One held up 3 fingers, then one, P1 on sectors and lap. The gesture didn't feel like triumph so much as permission. He now owned the start, which meant he owned the responsibility to write the line the rest would copy. He coasted to the pit cutout where Ava waited under a flapping canopy, hair pasted to her temples, laptop casting blue across her face. "Grid's yours," she said, scanning his rotors. "No fade marks, tire temps even. Your ghost made them block air." She slid a palm-sized puck across the cowl. "Beacon scout." "It's passive, reads the UWB ping and logs timing drift. We need to know its dead zone if you're going to flip Vale's lever without giving him the race." Neal palmed the puck, its rubberized skin cold. "You think he'll let me close enough to measure it in the feature?" he asked. Ava's mouth quirked. "I think Vale confuses confidence with control. He'll show you what he thinks you can't use." She hesitated, then added, "There's chatter about bait cars after the beacon. If you free her, they'll try to box your exit before Ghost 9 arrives. Exit ramp C, then the service lane behind the cold storage. Low curbs, no bollards. I've got 2 panel vans there to make the cameras blink." His phone vibrated. The screen filled with Vale's number. No spoof, no alias. He let it ring twice and swiped. Vale's voice came warm as an expensive lobby. "Mr. Bryson, you draw a fine grid." Neal watched rain pool in the seam at the base of the Jersey barrier. "You draw a crooked course," he said. A soft chuckle. "Crooked courses are honest. They show who improvises and who imitates. I prefer improvisers. Harder to price, more fun to own." There was the word again, nestled in velvet. Own. "You don't own outcomes," Neal said. "You rent them from people who don't know they're for sale." A breath, then, "In 10 minutes, we make something beautiful together. Bring your best line. Bring your worst fear. The beacon is hungry." The line clicked dead. Neal tucked the phone, then set the puck in the passenger door pocket where he could grab it one-handed. He looked past the start to the finish, and past the finish to ramp C and the sliver of dark beyond the cold storage. The escape route sketched itself across his mind's glass. Beacon trip without surrender, unlock, box trap, C-ramp, service lane, sprinter screen, out. He needed a move he could rehearse without revealing it, a motion the car could do at speed that would put Vale's nose over the tile and keep his own bumper on the safe side of the line. Not a pit, too crude in the wet, and Ghost 9's reflexes would drink it like rain. Something gentler, a brake light feint to plant Vale's weight on the nose, followed by a deep trail brake rotation that would open the inside a fraction, then close it again as he unwound, letting momentum do what malice wanted credit for. A marshal waved, the universal 5 to go. Ava leaned in, voice low. "Practice the feint once, not at the beacon, at the ramp exit. I'll watch the trace and tell you if the timing makes sense." He nodded. The Supra idled with a new timbre, density where strain used to live, and the clutch felt like a decision he had already made. Technique is how you put fear to work, he reminded himself. One thing at a time. Do it completely. He eased forward, felt the front tires write their dry, wet alphabet into his palms, and set his eyes past the line to the part of the night that hadn't been priced. Marshals funneled everyone to the line and then cleared them again, because in this feature, only 2 transponders mattered. The Porsche 992 Turbo S with Vale at the wheel and Neal's Supra. Everything else on course, entrance, bait vans, the odd confused commuter, was noise curated into hazard. The starter's arm knifed down. Vale's AWD launched like a slingshot, nose lifting, ceramics hissing. Neal fed clutch and throttle in one breath, no wheel hop, just the rear contact patches widening into grip. The dock front surface was glassed by forklifts and diesel. A rainbow sheen pooled at the inside curb of turn 1. Diesel is treachery you can smell. He widened entry, straddled the spill so the inside tires traced the pale, gritty band of untouched aggregate, while the outside pair skimmed the slick. He kept a whisper of throttle to avoid a lift-induced weight spike on the nose and let the 1.5-way diff share load instead of lighting a single tire. The car stayed neutral. The Porsche behind flicked once, traction control nibbling before it fed. 100 meters on, Vale's crew had scattered shrink wrap and pallet strap across the next bend, a clear plastic film that turned into invisible ice. Neal read the trap by the way spray skated sideways off the lead van's tires. He trail braked to plant the nose, then issued a micro flick, left a degree to load the right springs, right to rotate, so the Supra pivoted around the shiny patch instead of through it. He fed throttle exactly as the wheel unwound, converting yaw to forward without double-spending grip. The film crackled under the rear with a dry laughter sound. He was already gone. The spiral ramp was clean in the seating lap. Now it glittered with ball bearings, a polka of dull sparks under sodium. He toggled a kiss of rolling anti-lag to keep the turbo attentive, then brushed the handbrake a thumb width to set attitude without committing to slide. Bearings will skate a tire that's unweighted and grab one that's loaded. He stayed a tire's width high where a rough drainage seam bit through the marbles. Left foot dosed the brake to keep grams of load on the front while the rear followed like it was on a leash. Halfway up, a bait coupe feinted into him. He showed a false brake light, invited the dive, then eased deeper on a linear squeeze so the nose keyed and the coupe's ABS chattered itself wide. At the ramp exit, he rehearsed the beacon feint, blinked a hint of brake, then rolled deeper into a neat rotation and out. Timed, logged, done. Ava's voice cracked through his earpiece. Feint timing good. Don't cook anti-lag. On the rooftop, wind hit crosswise and tried to peel the ducktail. Vale's people had added empty cardboard flats that turned to skates when wet. Neal set the car 1 degree into the gust, hands quiet, elbows soft, then put a diagonal load through the chassis. A breath of brake to sink the nose, a whisper of throttle to lengthen the rear, letting the tires cut under the flats instead of surfing them. The Porsche loomed in the mirror, active arrow sneaking down at speed, AWD stepping over sins. Neal answered with math the wind could read. Back down the spiral, an unlit forklift edged out like a closing door. Straight-line brake would only bring him to the blade. Juking would stack lateral on top of longitudinal and lose both. He changed the problem. Release a beat early to free the front, add 2 degrees of angle, brush the brake to keep the nose authoritative, then feed just enough throttle to stretch the rear contact patches as he threaded the forklift's counterweight in the barrier with inches to spare. The lift rocked. His mirror stayed boring, which is what competence looks like. The boulevard funnel narrowed between Jersey barriers where Vale had parked twin white vans nose to tail to bait a wedge, a gap exactly car and a half wide and closing. Neal pre-braked earlier than ego would allow, conceding track position for geometry, dropped in behind the wedge's rear bumper, and used its wake as a slip pocket to pivot. When the lead van twitched, drivers rarely hold center under pressure. He pinned the opening with throttle while keeping the steering almost straight, kissing a low curb with the right rear to add a hair of rotation without asking the tire to slide. He slipped through, the Supra's splitter whispering at the barrier like a secret. On the elevated, the wind built, and the cameras blinked lazy. A construction aero board flashed a fake closure to herd him right into a lane glossed with cold patch. He stayed in the tram line he'd mapped on the seating lap, between paint and tar seam, timed his merge to the airport sprinter Ava had forecast, and disappeared beneath its IR opaque shadow while the cams took a slow blink. Crosswind sang in the guardrail. He set the chassis a degree into it and let the column tell him, through a fine morse of effort, that the front contact patches still owned the conversation. Sector end, then the beacon straight, tile embedded under tape, its UWB field quietly alive. Vale slipped up alongside, not to pass, but to bait. A brake check here would make Neal either trip the tile or eat bumper. Neal denied both. He shaded left, ran the Supra a meter off the line to graze the field's edge, puck logging signal without a trigger, then rolled power only as the wheel unwound. The Porsche nosed ahead, and then back, a cat testing a door. Not yet, he told himself. Measure, don't spend. Into the next complex, Vale salted a hydrant plume. Water fanned across the apex, a glassy tongue. Hydroplaning is a wedge problem. Pressure under the tire exceeds the tire's ability to pump it away. Neal stayed on the crown, lightened his hands, allowed a single clean skip, and let the tread re-engage without a correction that would ask the rear to play hero. A silver sedan behind took the shiny inside and spun a slow, expensive circle into the barrier, elegant as a lie. Last, a rolling roadblock. 2 bait cars side by side before exit ramp C. A stagger meant to freeze him just long enough for the box trap to close on the far side of the beacon. He borrowed a trick from the Touge. Set the chassis with a left-right-left cadence so weight moved like a metronome instead of a slosh, then downshifted with a perfect blip to put the engine squarely in the torque shelf as the inside car drifted half a foot off center. He threaded that half foot, mirrors folded, splitter brushing air, and landed on the ramp entry exactly when the Sprinter bus hove into view, camera blink window opening like a pupil. He breathed the Supra down the first ramp coil, anti-lag off, brakes cool and linear, brain clear enough to hear Ava again. Dead zone's left of center 2 meters wide. Your feint will push him right across it if he's greedy. Ahead, the tape in the tile and the hungry little light waited. Behind, the Porsche's turbos whistled, a predator's purr, patient as a bill coming due. Vale's answer to Neal's clean sectors was escalation, not more speed, more entropy. The first surprise lay flat and brown across the entry to a narrow chicane, a broken speed cushion that wasn't rubber at all, but a folded spike strip camouflaged with warehouse matting. In the wet, steel teeth hide until they sing. Neal read it in the way spray sheeted off the leading van and then split, water parted by edges, not by texture. He moved a tire's width right, so the Supra's right wheels climbed the curb lip, a 2-inch granite ribbon that bought height without bounce, then held the left wheels just inside the mat's inner seam. A light brake brush pinned the nose to keep the car straight as the chassis canted. A whisper of throttle lengthened the rear contact patches so the diff wouldn't freewheel the high side. The strip's teeth snapped air under the belly pan. The tires never met them. Behind, a sedan committed center and deflated itself in a shower of profanity. At the next bend, an alley truck belched a fan of surfactant foam, the kind of slick that steals not just grip, but feedback, turning the wheel into a polite liar. Neal refused the choice between slow and slide. He put 2 wheels on the sidewalk pavers, rough, toothy concrete, and kept the other 2 on the road's pale gray. Split mu driving is a conversation. The high grip side wants to yaw the car toward it. The low grip side wants to skate. He set a long linear brake to keep the fronts authoritative, then rolled just enough throttle to equalize rear slip angles. The Supra crabbed a degree, steady as a ferry in cross-current, and cleared the foam while the Porsche's AWD walked across it like a lizard on water. White light detonated in the cabin, an overhead drone strobe, a seizure of photons designed to erase depth. The human trick is older than LEDs. Occlude the glare. Neal dipped headlights to kill his own reflection, flicked on the dome light to flatten contrast, and moved his head an inch so the drone sat behind his A-pillar, a blacked-out wedge that ate the worst of it. Eyes pinned to Ava's grease pencil X, hands quiet, he let peripheral vision read spray and taillight drift as proxies for grip. The strobe washed the world. The column's fine grit Morse code continued to talk. A block later, the steering suddenly went heavy. EPAS choked by a dirty RF pulse. Electric assist gone, the wheel loaded like a gym plate. Neal didn't fight it. He reduced the demand. He straightened the hands by 2 degrees and asked the rear to help with angle. A breath of trail brake to pin the nose, a pressure roll on throttle to grow the rear contact patch, and the Supra rotated under torque rather than arm strength. The turn became a weight transfer exercise instead of a biceps test, the chassis doing math his shoulders didn't have to. The spiral ramp's second coil screamed new geometry. Vale's crew had hung a fishnet at half height, a sagging web ready to catch mirrors and pride. Neal went to half lane high, brushed the handbrake a thumb width to set attitude, and then ducked, not the car, himself. Lower body deep in the seat, arms relaxed, he trimmed the line so the splitter skimmed the net's bottom cord, while mirrors passed a hair beneath the top. He gave the rear a spoonful of throttle to hold height. Lift would have dropped the nose into the mess, then fed power as he unwound. The net twitched like a snare. The Supra slid past like a rumor. Back on the boulevard, 2 city pickups rolled out of a side street in a perfect rolling T, grill badges taped, strobes off, good enough to spook compliance. Behind, someone fired a canned police yelp on a PA. Vale wanted instincts, not skill. Neal measured lane widths, counted cones, and chose the gap that didn't exist yet. He braked early, always linear, always clean, dropping behind the lead truck's bumper to sit in its wake pocket. When the rear floated a half-foot under throttle, drivers rarely hold dead center when watched. He pinned the opening with a straight wheel and torque, kissing a low island with the right rear to add a centimeter of rotation without asking the tire to slide. He was through before the yelp finished lying. They tried electrical theater next, a rolling blackout on the elevated just as the wind came hard across the river. Darkness shrank the world to his hood. The guardrail sang a high wire note. No panic. He set the car a degree into the gust, lightened his hands, and let the chassis right into his palms. In the black, the road told the truth better than light. Tar seams hummed, expansion joints thunked, the column spoke in tiny friction vowels. He timed his merge to the airport sprinter's IR glass again, 2 minutes on schedule, right where Ava had drawn it, and slid under the camera's blink, like a thought he chose not to think. Near the Beacon Strait, Vale's van tossed a carpet of ceramic microbeads, retro-reflective grit that looked like dry road until it was under you. Beads polish into ball bearings when herded. The trick is, don't herd them. Neal entered with zero steering input, braking earlier and straighter than Ego liked to align the car with the exit before the carpet. Then he rode the carpet with a steady throttle hold, letting speed bleed by grade and drag rather than wheel angle. Only as the front left the beads did he add a degree of steering, and only as the rear left did he feed power. Behind, a coupe tried to correct in the middle of the glitter and wrote its name in the barrier. The decoy beacon came too, an extra taped square 10 meters short, blinking a fake IR wink for cameras. Ava's puck in the door pocket stayed dumb, no UWB tickle, and Neal treated the decoy like a pothole. Saw it, didn't stare, never flinched. He slid past an inch off center to log the true field's edge one more time without tickling it, mind already turning the feint's timing like a key in his fingers. One last gambit before the line. A swing arm gate pivoted out from a warehouse wall, a steel elbow sweeping the lane. Straight braking would stop him at the arm. A juke would stack asks and lose both. He released early to free the front, added 2 degrees of angle, brushed the brake to keep the nose authoritative, then gave the rear a breath of throttle so the car slipped under the arm's arc as if it had been drawn for him. The splitter whispered, the ducktail hummed, and the Supra traced a signature across the night that looked like arrogance and was only accuracy. The Beacon Strait opened at last, tape fluttering, tile hungry in the rain. Vale's Porsche eased to his flank, ceramic brakes drying themselves with a hiss, active arrow twitching like a predator's shoulders before a leap. Neal felt the Supra alive under him, brakes high and cool, oil temp honest, boost on a leash. Ava's voice threaded the noise. Dead zone left of center 2 meters. Faint timing good. Remember, you don't spin twice. He breathed once, long and even, and let the night's new tricks fall behind him like empty boxes in a warehouse aisle. The lever was in reach. The moment wasn't yet. Ahead of the tile, the world narrowed to pedal pressure and a steering angle measured in mortal hairs. The tile's UWB field kissed Vale's front bumper first, exactly as Neal's feint had drawn it, and somewhere inside a cold room a keypad flipped from red to green. Neal didn't wait to watch the Porsche streak past the tape. He was already peeling for exit ramp C, throttle rolled only as the wheel unwound, anti-lag off to keep heat out of the manifold. The Sprinter bus slid into its camera lane on schedule, and the Loop's eyes took a slow blink while the Supra disappeared underneath. 2 lefts and a service lane later, the cold storage dock yawned open, panel vans idling where Ava promised, their tall bodies filling the frame of 3 separate cameras with boring gray. Maya stood just inside the roll-up, cuffs fallen to the floor like shed antlers, bewilderment fighting adrenaline. Neal braked in a clean, long pour, no drama, all decel, stopped with the nose angled out, and flung the passenger door wide. In, he said, voice flat as a torque spec. She blinked at the car, at him. Neal? What? In, now. The tone carried the rest. She slid across the bucket, recorder still in her pocket, because of course it was. He yanked the belt across her, snapped the latch with a mechanic's authority, and looked up to see Vale's response arriving exactly on cue. 2 black sedans nosed into the mouth of the service lane and stopped nose to nose. a rolling wedge that turned into a wall by simply not moving. A pickup reversed to seal the back. A panel van, not one of Ava's, cribbed sideways across the dock aprons, cutting off the obvious flank. Vale's Porsche idled just beyond the sedans, nose angled, windows down. Mr. Bryson, his voice carried warm and amplified. Thank you. I'll take it from here. The word own lived under the thank you, velvet over steel. Neal's eyes did math while his hands stayed still. Wet yellow paint under the forward sedan's front tires. A dock safety stripe. A steel dock plate glistening just past its bumper. Low, broomed concrete under the Supra's right side tires. Smoother, sealed concrete under the left. A 6-inch curb along the dock face that could change bumper height by exactly what he needed. He spoke without looking at Maya. Feet flat. Head back. We're going to move a building that thinks it's a car. He eased the Supra's right wheels up onto the curb, a short climb that lifted his nose and raised his bumper into the sedan's left front wheel center line, not its bumper cover. Contact there caster jacks a car. The steering geometry lifts the target's front corner, shaving normal force off the tires. He lined the push angle to scrub steering toward left lock and steal what remained of the sedan's static grip. Left foot held brake to build boost against the clutch. Right foot fed just enough throttle to spool without lighting the rears. The engine loaded like a coiled spring. Don't spend twice. Ask once. Ask hard. 3, he said for Maya. 2. He released brake and rolled clutch in one smooth motion, torque arriving like a low tide turned flood. The Supra's bumper kissed the sedan's wheel face. The wheel climbed a centimeter and then lost the right to argue. Tires on wet paint and steel surrendered. Neal kept the wheel dead straight so every pound went to push, not yaw. The sedan slid backward on its own safety stripe, ABS chattering uselessly under a foot that had thought brakes were verbs that always worked. Neal fed 5 more millimeters of throttle, no more, so the rears stayed in the M they owned. The wedge opened by half a car, then more, the sedan's caster winding its tire toward full lock and taking the fight out of the contact patch. Behind, the pickup lunged in to pinch. Neal held the sedan another yard, enough to compress the box, and then flicked 1 degree right, shifting load to the Supra's left rear to keep drive on the rough concrete while his right tires still rode the curb. That change of height pushed his bumper down just enough to roll the sedan's lifted tire off the dock plate and pinwheel it toward the parked van. The gap widened to a lane no bureaucrat would approve, but physics would. Hold on. He blipped, dropped to first, and pulsed the throttle to hop the curb back down without scraping the splitter. Wheels straight, hands quiet, and then threaded the opening with inches to spare. The pickup's driver tried to pinch. Neal used the pickup's wake pocket like a handhold, straight line braking hard enough to key the nose but not so hard he had to add wheel, then pinned the micro gap as the truck drifted half a foot off center. The Supra slid through. The panel van's mirror folded against his glass with a soft crack, a tax he'd budgeted. Vale's laugh came soft over the PA, more amused than angry. Ownership delayed, not denied. Cute, he said. Run. Neal obliged. Second gear took, torque fat and clean on E85, the upgraded clutch transferring without spike, the diff sharing load like a promise kept. Maya's breath arrived in a single, shocked syllable that might have been a laugh or a sob. Seat back, he said, and she reached for the slider by reflex, even as her eyes stayed on the shrinking trap in the mirror. They hit the corner at the end of the lane too hot for paint and too cold for theater. Neal trail braked to plant the front, kept a gram of pressure as he added angle so the nose stayed in charge, then rolled onto throttle only as the wheel unwound, letting lateral bleed to longitudinal, never stacking asks, never paying interest. Behind them, the box re-knit and spilled into pursuit. Black sedans, the van, and, turning lazily from the loop's far side like a predator waking, the low, dark shape with arrow that breathed. Maya saw it too, voice finding itself around her recorder. Is that? Ghost 9, he said. Predicts the line you think you want. We won't give it one. He took the service road feeder, not because it was fast, but because its microtexture was honest. Broomed concrete and patched seams he could read with his palms. Look at me, he said, quick and calm, as the sedan's headlights bloomed in the mirror. She turned. You buckled? Yes. Good. If I say brace, Push your head back and keep your feet flat. We'll be fine. She nodded, bewilderment shrinking to the kind of focus you get when questions can't fit in the next 10 seconds. They burst from the service lane onto the boulevard under the airport sprinter's shadow again, cameras taking their long blink, and Neal set the chassis 1 degree into the crosswind. The chase began in earnest, Vale's crew swarming to pen them, and behind that, Ghost 9 lifting its arrow-like shoulders rolling before a sprint. Neal felt the Supra alive under him, oil temp honest, brakes high and cool, boost on a leash, and aimed for a lane only the night and a man who'd memorized it could see. Maya watched the sedan grid in behind them, voice low but urgent. Ghost 9 isn't just predictive vectoring. Vale's got an autonomous mode, HD maps, forward thermal, V2X chatter, and RTK satellite to anchor it. If you break the Skylink, he has to take the wheel. Neal's eyes stayed high, reading crown and camber. We don't have a skyhook. She was already digging in the center console. Ava does. Tracker scrub. She gave me this for sources with sticky cars. She held up a matchbox-sized black stub in a Faraday pouch. Cone-shaped GNSS noise. Short bursts or you cook cameras and attention. He nodded once. Not yet. The first sedan lunged for a PIT on his left rear. Neal took half a breath off the throttle to pin a gram of weight on the nose, brushed the brake to keep the front authoritative, then added 2 degrees of angle so the contact patch spent on rotation, not surprise. The sedan tapped nothing but air, over-rotated into its own momentum, and slid into a line of water-filled barrels. A soft boom, a glittering fan, lights still blinking. 1 down. A second sedan tried the wedge on a 2-lane feeder, side by side to force him straight. Neal moved first, not farther. A crisp upshift at 5.2 that took the Supra through a brief torque dip, making the sedan assume a brake. It darted to cover an overshot. Neal came back on torque, kissed its rear quarter with a pressure you'd use to close a door gently, and let its own yaw finish the sentence. It spun clean into a painted runoff triangle, pirouette tidy as a practiced lie. 2. The truck arrived big and loud at the next cross street, nosing to block the apex. Box trucks understeer when scared. He gave it fear. Neal showed the truck a big brake light early, then trailed deeper than any sane person would into the turn. The driver stabbed too hard, too straight. Weight pitched, front scrubbed, the box drifted like a sofa. Neal rotated under it and exited with the wheel already unwinding. The truck plowed into a stack of sand-filled attenuators and stopped sulking. 3. Sedan 3 tried to side draft on the elevated, inches of air between mirror and mirror. Neal set the Supra 1 degree into the crosswind, then skimmed a shallow expansion joint that lifted the inside wheels of the sedan just enough to twitch ESC awake. The computer yanked power, momentum died, space opened. He slid away while the sedan regrouped, brake lights embarrassed. 4. Sedan 4 blocked the mouth of a ramp with a perfect static wedge. Neal changed the geometry. Right wheels hopped a low curb to raise his bumper. The left stayed on rough concrete for drive. He caster-jacked the sedan's front corner the way he had at the dock, letting the steering geometry lift the tire and shave normal force from the front. The wedge became a door, then a hall. 5. Sirens grew as a chorus rather than an alarm. Lieutenant. Rios had read Ava's dump and was playing shepherd. Patrol cars slid in behind the wrecked wedge and sealed lanes in Neal's wake, turning Vale's board into a narrower, safer game. Up ahead, the dark, low shape unwound from traffic and leveled on them, active arrow settling with a predatory calm. Ghost 9. The supercar's first move was a ghost pass. Predict the gap he'd take, preoccupy it, and force a touch. Neal refused prediction. He delayed turn-in by half a heartbeat, then rotated on a long, linear trail brake so the apex came to him instead of him to it. Ghost 9 twitched left to answer. He twitched nowhere, letting its model miss by the width of a thought. Next came a sideswipe bait. He answered with a brake light feather that loaded Vale's nose, then let the Porsche-like silhouette drift wide on its own wounded pride. They traded near misses like chess moves, each trying to put the other into a line that spent twice on the same grip. Now? Maya asked, the stub in her palm. Ahead, the freeway shouldered into the airport viaduct where cameras blinked lazy and sky opened like a dish. Now, he said. She pulled the pouch, thumbed the stub awake, and held it at the base of the windshield aimed up and back. A soft hiss in the speakers, a constellation of warning icons winked not in the Supra, but in the rear view. Ghost 9's posture changed. Its arrow stopped breathing automatically. Its micro-corrections got human. Vale had to take the wheel. A patrol unit eased alongside, siren off, and Rios's voice came flat on the public channel. "Bryson, we've got lanes closed behind you and ahead at Summit. Keep them on the scenic route." Ava's text chimed a beat later. "Mountain fog back. KM7 still off Camber Seam." He nodded to no one and pointed the Supra for the hills, taking the broomed concrete feeders where tires tell the truth. Ghost 9 stayed glued, now driven, not divined. Vale tried a late break lunge into a decreasing radius right. Neal let him until the last heartbeat. He bled another ounce of pressure later than physics teaches cowards, rotated the Supra under Vale's nose, and exited with a car's width of dignity. Sirens peeled off as the city fell away. Mountain Black opened. The first switchbacks came in fog banners. Neal protected exits, not entries. Ghost 9 protected pride. Vale shoved for the inside at kilometer 7, exactly where the patched tar and off-camber seam made a liar of the surface. Neal set the Supra high, away from the seam, and lifted a breath to move weight to the nose. Ghost 9 dove, loaded, and then pushed, finding the seam's glass. He caught it. He's not bad. But now he was reading the road, not forecasting it. "Guardrail terminations ahead," Maya said, scanning the fog like a cartographer. "Bullnose style, angled lips." Neal saw them too, blunt steel with flared end terminals. Ramps if you got it wrong. He thought friction circle, normal force, yaw. "Brace," he said. She pressed head back, feet flat. He baited the inside on the next right, brake light feather, car a hair wide, then traded his ask. Deeper trail brake to rotate, a half-lane late apex. Vale took the inside like a gift. Neal released early to free the front, added a degree of angle, and gave the rear a breath of torque, so the Supra slipped past the guardrail lip with millimeters to spare. Ghost 9, committed to the inside and still a tick of push from the seam's lie, caught the flared terminal with its right front at a whiff of yaw. The tire climbed, the rail became a ramp, and the supercar high-centered into a tilted wheelie. Front tires hanging in air, rear still on tarmac, arrow stuck half open like a breath held too long. Neal lifted, straightened, and rolled on. No victory slide, no comment, while patrol cars poured in from both ends of the ribbon like bookends finding a shelf. Rios's voice turned from flat to satisfied. "We've got him." Ghost 9's door opened slow. Vale climbed out with the look of a man who'd run out of levers. Neal dropped pace to a legal murmur as the fog thinned, hands steady at 9 and 3, Maya's breath finally finding a rhythm that wasn't survival. Behind them, red and blue stitched the mountain in threads. Ahead, the two-lane fell toward a quiet road that would take them off the board. Maya set the stub back in its pouch, thumb trembling just once. "You didn't wipe him," she said. "You let the road tell the truth." Neal watched the water beat on the hood and run in clean lines. "We didn't have to win his way," he said. "We just had to stop renting the outcome." They took the turnout Ava had marked hours ago without knowing why, the one that looked like nothing from a distance and safety up close. The Supra idled, metal ticking as heat found air. In the rear view, Ghost 9 hung on the rail like a lesson. In the cabin, the recorder in Maya's pocket captured the quiet. Sirens dimmed to weather. "Seat okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Seat's fine," she said, and it sounded like more than a seat. "What now?" He looked at the road falling away, at the damp night, at the line he'd protected all evening. "Now," he said, "we go tell the story." Dawn leaked into the city in a thin gray wash, while Ava sat under strip lights at the precinct, laptop open, fingers steady. Lieutenant Rios stood with a mug and a chain of custody form as she pushed the dump. Hashed ledgers from Vale's exchange, odds movements time-aligned to scraped telemetry spikes, purchase orders for safety equipment that matched last night's hazards, and the Puck's log of the finished tile's ultra-wideband field. Its dead zone mapped exactly where Neal had steered Vale's nose. Her beacon folder held the restraint protocol diagram she'd reconstructed, message IDs that corresponded to red/green unlock states, and CAN bus captures proving rivals had been fed a counterfeit Neal Ghost. Rios's tech ran checksums, nodded at the matches, and started warrants for servers and storage lockers. You didn't bet, Ava told Rios softly. He priced people. Rios signed. And tonight, the bill came due. Maya gave her statement in the next room with the calm of someone who carries a recorder because memory fails where facts mustn't. She turned over the carbon-scuffed cuffs and the matte keypad pulled from the holding chair, handed over a photo the disgruntled marshal had sent weeks earlier of the scratched gray tile under a Finnish gantry. Played the interviews, Finch the bookmaker bragging about Vale's beacon, a tech explaining how DNFs paid when the odds said they would, and finally, the clipped call in which Vale's voice thanked Neal at the cold storage dock and promised to take it from here. Her notes showed the math. Live odds shifts syncing to telemetry anomalies. Unforced errors, arriving exactly where side bets cleared. A detective slid her a cup of water and the city's tired smile. You kept your recorder on. She nodded. I always do. By the time the sun found edges on buildings, the Supra was back in the shop bay breathing warm metal into cool air. Ava stepped out for an hour with Rios to sit on a stack of servers. The bay went quiet except for the soft tick of contraction and the softer cadence of two people who had run out of adrenaline. Maya stood with her palms on the fender as if feeling the car's pulse. Neal leaned beside her and watched condensation draw pale commas on the hood. He didn't trust speeches, so he translated. I kept telling myself you were horsepower, he said, the headline that turns heads. But that's wrong. You're torque, the steady pull that moves weight when the road is bad. When I start to chase the shiny number, you remind me what actually carries us. She smiled, cautious, curious. He went on. With you, boundaries feel like a good brake pedal, high, firm, predictable. Not a panic stomp, a squeeze. You make stopping safe when it needs to be, and when it's time to go, you don't fade. He traced the air with a fingertip, like drawing an invisible alignment sheet. I used to run around with too much front camber, great for one lap, chords for the next. With you, I've got the alignment right, just enough lean in to bite, not enough to burn ourselves out. A whisper of toe out so we can pivot into hard conversations, still calm on the freeway of ordinary days. Her laugh came out as a breath. Keep going. Rev matching, he said softer. That's us. I don't drag you into my gear and call it connection. I see your cadence, I blip, and the downshift doesn't shock either of us. You do that for me when my head's still at Redline after the fight and yours is already at idle. He tapped the half cage behind the seats. People say vulnerability like it's a soft word. This is how I understand it. You build a safe shape so impact doesn't define you. If you want it, I'll be the harness. Snap in. I'll hold. She looked down at her recorder in her pocket, then up at him. That's wildly on brand and somehow perfect. He took a breath, let it out smooth, long, linear, like a good trail break. I love you, Maya. You're the line I protect, not the apex I chase. Exits win races and get people home. You're my exit. He almost laughed at himself, then didn't. You're the wet line when the world pretends the groove is safe. You're the cooler in the radiator. I don't want the hero pull. I want the miles. If you want me, I'll be ready the instant you ask. Anti-lag without the smoke. Her eyes found his, then the little grease pencil X Ava had left at the windshield's edge. The place to look when spray makes chaos of everything. You keep calling me torque, she said. Here's my analogy back. You're the limited slip. When life leans on us, you don't let one of us spin while the other sits still. You share the load. She set the recorder on the bench, as if to make the next part off the record on purpose, and stepped closer. I love you too, Neal. Not because you're fast, but because you're exact. Because you listened to the road when the night begged you to perform. Because you chose exits. Outside, sirens softened to traffic. A text from Ava popped up. Servers seized. Vale lawyered. Rios happy. Sleep once. Another from Rios followed a minute later for both of them. We've got enough to hold him. Charges pending. Keep your heads down until we brief. Neal thumbed back a single acknowledgement, then turned to the car and clicked the ignition on just long enough to hear the straight six clear its throat and settle. He shut it off again and let the tick-tick-tick answer for him. Maya slid into the passenger seat and buckled by habit. "Tell me one more," she said, chin tilted toward him, the morning making a bright stripe on her cheek. He grinned, shy for once. "Okay. The friction circle. We can only spend so much at once. If I spend on guilt, I don't have anything left for being here. With you, I want a clean budget. I want to spend on now." She leaned over and kissed him. It felt like a perfect heel toe. No jolt, all yes. By noon, Ava was back in the bay with a stale muffin and a grin that belonged on a victory podium. The city had already started swapping rumors for articles: illegal wagering, device seizures, malfunctioning supercar. Somewhere uptown, a white-collar unit counted terabytes. Somewhere downtown, Vale counted the ways his levers had turned to paper. And in a small shop lit by sideways sun, a Supra cooled after a night that asked everything and got only what Neal chose to give. He looked at Maya, at Ava, at the car. "We didn't win his way," he said. Maya clicked the recorder on and pointed it at both of them. "No," she said. "We told the road the truth.